Welcome to the Swiftwater Awareness Training. Many of Minnesota state parks have rivers that flow through them. All of the state parks located on Minnesota's shoreline of Lake Superior have a river as a feature. Every year, thousands of visitors recreate on Minnesota lakes and rivers to kayak, canoe, or motorboat.
While this type of recreation is generally safe, hazards do exist, particularly when it comes to moving water. Although rare, serious incidents including drownings have happened. As a state employee, you may be called upon to respond to such emergencies.
The key concepts that we will be covering are: what is our level of response? What is swift water? Different river features and how to read moving water. Initial response and things to consider. And rescue techniques.
For this training, we are following the guidelines of the National Fire Protection Association, as well as Minnesota Department of Natural Resources policies. Afterwards, you will have a basic knowledge to recognize the need for a swift water rescue, activation of specialized rescue resources, scene size-up, and general hazard recognition. We will also be covering 3 basic rescue techniques: coach, reach, and throw. Always keep in mind that your safety is the first priority, secondary is anyone assisting you, and finally, the victim.
Before we begin going over the various rescue techniques, we will first need to understand what swift water is and how to identify hazards. Rivers have a main current where the main body of water possesses the fastest and most consistent flow. As the water flows, it may encounter various obstacles that create different hydrologic features. Some common terms related to these features include current vector. This is the main direction that the current is flowing. Lateral wave. This is when a wave presents laterally to the main current vector. Recirculation. This hydrological feature can keep you suspended by the backwash of upstream water coming directly downstream of the feature. Eddy. The reverse current created when fluid flows past an obstacle. This is a space that is devoid for downstream flowing fluid. Sieves, sometimes referred to as rock gardens, sieves allow water through but can entrap boats or people. And strainers, obstructions such as trees or rebar that allow water passage but may potentially hold victims or gear in place. Now that we know some of the basic features of rivers, we're ready to discuss our response to water emergencies. Your safety is the priority. The swift water environment is dynamic and poses numerous hazards to both the victim and rescuer. Therefore, anytime we're going to be responding to swift water emergencies, a personal flotation device, or PFD, is an absolute must.
Once you arrive at the scene, call 911 and designate someone to keep watch in order to direct them to the scene. After 911 is called, assess the area to identify hazards, the victim's location, access points, and points along the river where a rescue might be attempted. Assess if the situation is static or dynamic.
One of the first rescue techniques to attempt is to gain the attention of the swimmer and coach them to a shore. A swimmer might be in a panic state and attempting to swim up current. This is where your knowledge of current and river feature plays a role. Use a whistle to gain their attention or yell.
Feet up! Swim to shore! Help is on the way!
Once you have their attention, direct them to swim at a downstream angle or 45 degrees to the closest shore or eddy. In an ideal situation, we would be able to coach the swimmer to the same shore that we are on, however that might not be possible. The next best option is to turn a dynamic situation into a static one until more rescuers arrive. There are limitations to this approach that you need to be aware of. First, the swimmer might not be able to hear you, even with a whistle. Communication in swift water can be challenging. Blunt, simple, and clear commands are best in these types of situations. Trying to give someone detailed instruction who might be in a state of panic and exhausted is unlikely to be successful. Second, you will have to make a quick determination as to the swimmer's ability. If they have been in the water for some time, they might be getting tired or hypothermic. Asking them to attempt to swim across current may put them in a more dangerous situation. The key points are: gain the attention of the swimmer. Use clear, simple language and point to where you want the swimmer to go. Limitations are the swimmer's ability to follow commands and/or fatigue. The second rescue technique is to attempt to reach the swimmer with an object such as an oar or a branch from the shoreline. Keep in mind when extending an object to a possibly panicked swimmer that you do not overextend yourself. It is critically important that you have solid footing with a PFD on and that you are not above a hazardous feature should you be pulled in by the swimmer. Make sure you get the swimmer's attention so that they know you are going to extend an object to them. Keep in mind that if the swimmer is in a moving current, that once they grab a hold of the object, this action will create a shock load that could pull you into the water. If possible, have another person anchor behind you to help absorb this initial shock. Once the swimmer has a hold of the object, pivot your body to bring them to shore. There are limitations to this rescue method. First, the swimmer has to be alert and able to follow commands. Again, simple, clear commands work best. Second, this method is limited by how far you can safely reach. The key points are: select a location that has good footing and/or bracing. If available, have someone anchor you. Gain the attention of the swimmer, use clear, simple commands. Extend the object to the swimmer and be prepared to brace for the initial shock load when the swimmer grabs hold. Pivot the swimmer to shore. The limitations for this method are: is the swimmer able to follow commands? Is the reach of the swimmer limited? The last rescue technique is to throw a line to the swimmer. In most swift water situations, this is the simplest and most effective method for getting someone to shore. However, to become proficient with a throw bag, you have to periodically practice with it. Practice will help you successfully land your throw in the critical moment. The first step before the throw is to identify a location where you can deploy the rope. You might have to do this while moving swiftly on a shoreline in order to get downstream of the swimmer. You will need to evaluate where to deploy, but also the area downstream where the swimmer is going to end up. It won't be good getting a line to someone, only to then belay them into a hazard such as a recirculating current. As with other rescues we discussed, we need to gain the attention of the swimmer. Again, use simple, clear commands such as yelling "rope" to the swimmer. When deploying the rope, aim for an area in front of the swimmer. It is best to have the rope line land within reach of the swimmer without having them swim to grab the rope. Once the swimmer has the rope, tell them to place the rope over the opposite shoulder to the shore that you are belaying them to. For example, if you are belaying them to River Right, instruct them to place the rope over their left shoulder. You will want the rope to go around your hips. Never tie yourself to the rope. Your hands should be free to let loose in case of an emergency. Use your hands and body to pivot downstream and to the shore. If possible, have someone anchor you, as this will give you more control and provide greater stability. You may have to go to a dynamic moving belay by moving downstream as you bring the swimmer to shore. The goal is to guide the swimmer to shore or a calm eddy. When belaying the swimmer to shore, you may need to let rope out or shorten it to get the swimmer around obstacles in the river. If there are two rescuers with throw bags, each should stage apart along the river. The rescuer upstream will be the primary thrower, and the one downstream will be the secondary. Keep in mind that by having the rope in moving water, you are creating the potential for an entanglement, so one rope at a time. If you miss, recoil your rope fast to allow the secondary thrower a clear chance to deploy their line. The key points are: find a good location on shore that is downstream of the swimmer with a suitable place to bring the swimmer into shore. Gain the attention of the swimmer and clearly communicate that the rope is going to be thrown at them. Have them place the rope over the opposite shoulder of the shore that you intend to belay them to. Anchor yourself well or move along the shore as you belay them in. Keep in mind that you may need to adjust the rope to move the swimmer to avoid obstacles. Limitations are: putting a line in the water creates an entanglement danger for the swimmer. The swimmer must be able to follow commands. The thrower's ability to effectively deploy the rope to a spot that is easy for the swimmer to reach. There are different options when it comes to throwing a rope bag. Each has its advantages and disadvantages. The most important thing is to practice all three and find a method that works for you, whereby you are consistent, accurate, and precise when deploying the throw bag. The overhand technique is like throwing a football. It is a good option if there is a limited room to throw or you only need to throw a short distance. The underhand throw is the most often used throwing technique. It is simple to do and can get the rope out a long distance. To use this method, extend your arm straight back, then sling your arm forward in a controlled manner. The release point should be as if you are extending your hand to the swimmer. The final method is a semi-sidearm throw. This method is well suited for throwing a coiled rope. Practice dry land throwing in order to refine your technique.
All of the rescues that we've covered so far are for swimmers who are still able to follow commands and actively participate in their own rescue. What about those who are unable to? Their best chance of survival will come from you knowing the area and your ability to get specialized rescue teams to the location immediately.
Keep these concepts in mind in order to be prepared when a swift water emergency arises.